Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On a cold Saturday in December of 1938, 19-year-old Margaret Martin left her home in Kingston, Pennsylvania, expecting to discuss a secretarial job. The opportunity sounded legitimate. The man who contacted her claimed he was opening an insurance agency, and he said Margaret's business college had recommended her. She had every reason to be hopeful, but Margaret never returned home. And the person who arranged that meeting was never conclusively identified. Margaret was at the beginning of her adult life. Only 17 days earlier, she had graduated with honors from Wilkes-Barre Business College. Her achievement reflected both ability and preparation. She had trained for office work and was ready to put that education to use. In the difficult economic climate of the late 1930s, a respectable secretarial position could mean independence, stability, and a real start. So when someone called with just such an offer, it would not have seemed extraordinary. That timing is one of the most unsettling parts of the case. The caller did not approach Margaret with a vague promise or an obviously suspicious story. He offered precisely the kind of position for which she had recently qualified. He also invoked the name of her college, creating an apparent connection to an institution she knew and trusted. Whether he had researched Margaret, learned about her through local circles, or simply constructed a convincing lie remains unknown. The call came on December 17, 1938. The unknown man said he was preparing to open an insurance agency. According to his story, Margaret's college had recommended her for a secretarial role. He then arranged to meet her near Kingston Corners, a familiar commercial area close to her home. Nothing about that public meeting place necessarily suggested danger. It sounded like an ordinary first step: meet the employer, discuss the work, and perhaps arrange a formal interview. So let's back up a second and consider what Margaret likely understood. She was not knowingly meeting a stranger for a social outing. She believed she was responding to a professional opportunity linked, at least in the caller's telling, to her recent education. That distinction matters. The person on the telephone appears to have used Margaret's ambitions and sense of responsibility to make the meeting feel safe. The trap, if it was planned as one, was built around credibility rather than force. Margaret left for Kingston Corners dressed for the occasion. The exact conversation she expected to have is lost to history, but the purpose was clear: employment. Somewhere near the arranged location, a witness later reported seeing a young woman matching Margaret's description. She was seen entering a brown Plymouth with a neatly dressed man whose hair was described as sandy. That sighting became one of the investigation's most important leads, but it came with a devastating limitation. No one recorded the Plymouth's license plate. At the time, the car probably looked unremarkable. A well-dressed man collecting a young woman in a busy area would not automatically attract suspicion, especially if she entered voluntarily. Only later, after Margaret failed to return, would that brief moment take on enormous significance. The witness could provide a vehicle color, a make, and a general description of the driver. But without the plate, police had no direct path to a registered owner, and that is where the known timeline begins to fracture. Margaret reached the meeting area, or at least a woman believed to be Margaret was seen there. She apparently entered the brown Plymouth. After that, there is no confirmed public account of where she was taken, how long she remained alive, or what occurred inside or outside that vehicle. A normal job interview had become a disappearance, but the people waiting at home could not yet know how carefully the encounter may have been arranged. When Margaret did not come back, concern grew into alarm. She was 19, newly graduated, and setting out for a specific appointment. Her absence was not easily explained as a casual change of plans. Yet investigators faced an immediate problem. Nearly everything they knew about the supposed employer came from the caller himself. His insurance agency might never have existed. The recommendation might have been invented. Even the professional identity he implied could have been nothing more than a voice on the telephone. The disappearance also unfolded during a local newspaper strike. An accident of timing that complicated early attempts to publicize the case. Today, an alert can circulate across a region in minutes. In 1938, newspapers were one of the principal ways to distribute a photograph, a physical description, or details about a suspicious vehicle. With normal publication disrupted, the search lost some of the immediate reach that might otherwise have produced a witness while memories were still fresh. That delay mattered because the most useful information was perishable. Someone may have noticed a brown Plymouth parked near Kingston Corners. A garage attendant might have remembered the driver. A passerby might have seen Margaret after she entered the car. But people do not always recognize the significance of an ordinary detail until they hear that a crime has occurred. If the news reaches them late, the exact time, clothing, direction of travel, and facial features can already be fading. Investigators nevertheless launched an extensive search and pursued numerous leads. The description of the sandy-haired man offered a starting point, although it was broad enough to include many possible suspects. The brown Plymouth was another clue, but there were limits to tracing a common vehicle without a plate number or confirmed ownership. Police also had to confront a basic uncertainty. Was the witness sighting definitely Margaret? And was the man in the car definitely the same person who had telephoned her? Those questions sound cautious, perhaps even frustratingly cautious, but they are essential in an unsolved case. A witness can be sincere and still mistaken. Two people could have been involved, one making the call and another driving the car, or the sighting could have captured Margaret with the caller exactly as investigators suspected, without stronger physical or documentary evidence. Each possibility had to remain open. The case depended heavily on a few moments observed from the outside. For 4 days, Margaret's family and community were left without an answer. The supposed interview had vanished into silence. There was no verified employer to contact, no office where she could be found, and no known reason for her to remain away. The winter landscape around northeastern Pennsylvania contained roads, wooded areas, waterways, and scattered rural stretches. An automobile could carry someone far beyond the immediate neighborhood quickly, widening the territory investigators had to consider. Then on December 21st, the search changed completely. A hunter near Keelersburg Creek, approximately 25 miles from Margaret's home, discovered a burlap sack in the water. Inside was Margaret's body. The hopeful effort to locate a missing young woman became a murder investigation. The distance from Kingston suggested that whoever transported her had access to a vehicle and enough familiarity, confidence, or opportunity to leave her well away from the meeting place. The use of a burlap sack also indicated concealment. It placed a barrier between Margaret and anyone who might happen to look toward the creek, and it could have made transportation easier. But the publicly known facts do not provide a complete chain showing where the sack came from, where Margaret was killed, or precisely when she was placed in the water. Keelersburg Creek was the recovery site. It was not necessarily the location where the murder itself occurred. Now here's where the investigation became especially difficult. Detectives had to work backward from two separate points: Kingston Corners, where Margaret had gone to meet the caller, and the creek where she was found 4 days later. Between those locations was an unobserved journey of roughly 25 miles. Somewhere along that route, or perhaps somewhere beyond it, were the missing pieces: the car, the killer, the crime scene, and any evidence that had not disappeared with time. The brown Plymouth naturally remained central to the inquiry. If the sighting was accurate, it could explain how Margaret was moved away from Kingston. Yet identifying a car from make and color alone was a massive challenge. Vehicles could be sold, borrowed, repainted, or registered outside the immediate community. A driver could also avoid familiar roads. Investigators were searching not just for a machine, but for the connection between that machine, the sandy-haired man, and the voice Margaret heard. The caller's claim about the business college raised another set of questions. How did he know Margaret had attended? Did he know she had recently graduated? Had he obtained her name from an announcement, a directory, a personal acquaintance, or ordinary local conversation? Or had he contacted several young women and happened to reach one whose qualifications fit his story? The answers could have revealed whether Margaret had been individually selected, but the caller left no confirmed identity behind. His manner may have been just as important as the facts he gave. To persuade Margaret to attend, he apparently sounded credible enough that she accepted the arrangement. He did not need to prove that an agency existed before the meeting. He needed only to borrow the authority of the college and promise work that matched her training. It was a form of social trust that investigators could describe but could not trace. A telephone call left very little evidence in 1938. Police followed numerous tips, as often happens when a case receives broad attention. Each report had to be evaluated. A man might resemble the witness description but have no connection to Margaret. A brown Plymouth might appear suspicious but be accounted for by its owner. Someone might claim to have seen Margaret in another location, only for the timeline not to fit. An extensive manhunt can generate an enormous amount of information without producing the one fact that proves identity. Investigators even attended Margaret's funeral in plain clothes. That detail tells us something about the possibilities they were considering. Police sometimes watched funerals in the belief that an offender might attend, either because he knew the victim or because he wanted to observe the consequences of the crime. But attendance alone would not establish guilt. The detectives had to look for unusual behavior while surrounded by grieving relatives, friends, neighbors, and curious members of the public. Imagine the tension in that room. Margaret's family was burying a daughter who had graduated with honors less than 3 weeks before her disappearance. At the same time, plainclothes investigators were quietly studying faces, wondering whether the man responsible had entered among the mourners. Every unfamiliar person could draw attention. Every familiar person could raise a different concern. Yet the strategy produced no publicly confirmed breakthrough, and no arrest led to a conviction in Margaret's murder. The case also forced investigators to consider whether the killer was local. The caller knew enough to refer to Margaret's college and choose Kingston Corners as a meeting place. The body was left around 25 miles away, suggesting at least some ability to navigate the surrounding region. but local knowledge does not always mean local residence. A traveling worker, former resident, customer, or someone passing regularly through the area might have known the same landmarks without attracting attention afterward. There is also the question of appearance. The man seen with the woman matching Margaret was described as neatly dressed. That may have reinforced the impression of a business appointment. A suit, coat, or generally professional presentation could lower suspicion and help support the insurance agency story, but clothing can be changed immediately. And sandy hair is not a unique identifier. The description offered investigators an image, not a name. It could narrow attention slightly, but it could not single out one person. What makes the crime feel so deliberate is the sequence. First came a call tailored to Margaret's professional goals, then came a meeting in a public, ordinary location. A car provided mobility, and Margaret was later found concealed far from home. Still, we have to separate reasonable inference from established fact. It is reasonable to suspect planning. It is not known how long the offender prepared, whether Margaret had encountered him before, or whether every part unfolded as he intended. The absence of modern forensic tools widened those uncertainties. Investigators in 1938 could not rely on surveillance cameras, mobile phone records, digital location histories, or searchable electronic databases. Even telephone tracing was far more limited. Physical evidence could be collected and examined, but many techniques now considered routine either did not exist or could not offer the same precision. If the offender left no recognizable personal item and avoided being clearly identified, the investigation could stall despite intense effort. And once the early window closed, the disadvantages multiplied. Witness recollections became less exact, vehicles changed hands. People moved away, died, or forgot conversations that had once seemed trivial. Records could be incomplete or lost. A suspect who had appeared ordinary in 1938 might never again draw official attention. Cold cases are often described as waiting for one missing piece, but sometimes that piece was available only briefly, before anyone understood that it mattered. Margaret's case is sometimes reduced to its most haunting elements: a mysterious call, a brown Plymouth, and a body in a creek. But behind those clues was a young woman who had worked toward a future. She had completed her studies with honors and responded to what sounded like a legitimate opportunity. Her willingness to attend the meeting was not recklessness. It was a reasonable response to a carefully framed professional approach, made in a world where institutional recommendations carried weight. The unknown caller exploited that trust. Whether he acted alone remains uncertain. Whether he knew Margaret personally remains uncertain. Even the exact relationship between the caller, the sandy-haired driver, and the murder cannot be demonstrated from the publicly established facts. What can be said is that Margaret left to meet a supposed employer. A witness saw someone matching her enter a brown Plymouth, and 4 days later Margaret was found dead approximately 25 miles from home. No one was ever convicted. The extensive manhunt, the leads, the vehicle description, and the plainclothes surveillance at the funeral failed to reveal an identity that could be proved in court. Somewhere in the case was a man who knew what to say, where to arrange the meeting, and how to disappear afterward. He may have been questioned and released, overlooked entirely, or never brought to investigators' attention. The surviving facts cannot tell us which possibility is closest to the truth, more than anything. The murder of Margaret Martin endures because the first deception was so simple. A telephone rang. A man offered employment. He attached his story to a respected college and met a newly qualified graduate in a public place. There was no dramatic warning, only the familiar language of opportunity. The identity behind that voice remains unknown, leaving Margaret's family without justice and leaving Kingston Corners as the last known threshold between her promising new life and an unanswered crime. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.